Greetings, fellow Kerbonauts. Rhadamant here. Thank you for tuning in to the very first episode of a new series covering Kerbal Space Program 2. If you would like to skip the introduction, please use YouTube chapters. Episode 1. Learn how to play. So, I think it would help if I explained what Kerbal Space Program was, for those that do not know, because it's a rather unique game, and it requires a little bit of explanation. It is the sequel to a spaceflight simulation game, the original Kerbal Space Program, where you take charge of a space program. You have access to an array of parts to assemble fully functional spacecraft that flies, or doesn't, based on realistic aerodynamic and orbital physics. And then, in this series, it'll be a marathon series, meaning I'll be live for probably around 12 hours or so, but that will be up to you. And it will be a tutorial series where you can learn how to play Kerbal Space Program 2 without any knowledge of the original or this game. And I'll be teaching how as I stream. The game right now only has a sandbox mode, but in the original Kerbal Space Program, it had a career mode where you slowly progress through technology and unlock parts and gain enough wealth to build up more complex space missions. And I'll be simulating sort of a career mode, meaning that I'm not going to immediately jump to the most complex ships. It's going to be a slow progression, so it's easy to learn. And then also, the complexity of the missions that we undertake will be gradually ramping up. Again, easier to learn. So let's start. We are going to be on normal. I'll talk a little bit about the difficulties here. Docking tolerance is when you dock two ships in space. I've never found docking to be easy, but it really depends on ship design. Now, on easy and normal, you can revert, quick load, and include stock vessels. I'm not going to be including stock vessels. You can also turn on infinite fuel and power if you wanted. The game in its current state doesn't have, like, super hyper futuristic tech. It's missing a lot of the features that will eventually be added in. So infinite fuel and power, can help you experience sort of interstellar type stuff, because the true interstellar technology is not out yet. You can also disable crash damage and unbreakable joints, which I won't be doing. But I'm going to be playing on normal. So campaign name is just Yoda, because I'm boring. And we'll just have Kerbal Space Agency. I like that as the default name. As far as a logo goes, this one might be appropriate, but I don't know. I kind of like the rockets. So there we are. There's our agency colors and flag and all that stuff. So right off the bat, I will be explaining the very basics. The game, contrary to the original Kerbal Space Program, Kerbal Space Program 2 does come with pretty good tutorials about orbital mechanics, transfers, maneuvers, that kind of thing. Oh.
Your new space program, leaping forward into the cosmos. Since the dawn of Kerbal kind, we have looked to the sky and wondered what sublime mysteries lie hidden in the darkness, like jewels never beheld. These untold treasures may soon reveal themselves due to the efforts recently founded Kerbal Space Program.
Oh my! I think that might have been the only copy of the orientation film. Hold on! Slides, somewhere. Welcome to your first day running the Kerbal Space Program. This campus hosts the greatest ever gathering of astronomers, astronauts, and engineers. After years of focused effort, this collection of geniuses has created several very impressive buildings. We believe we have all the necessary pieces to take our first steps off the ground. The best way to advance our technologies further is to get up there and learn by doing. All we need now is somebody to show us how to put all these parts together. Well, we also need somebody to help us out with the flying. We need a lot of help, actually. That's why you're here. My name is Paige, by the way. If you need any hints, feel free to visit me over at the training center. Everything in there is well padded, so it's a great place to get up and running. Welcome aboard!
All right. So that was the intro cinematic. If you are new to Kerbal Space Program 2, the original one wasn't voice acted and didn't have really any tutorials whatsoever. I was actually making Kerbal Space Program tutorials before I ever even became a YouTuber because it was complicated enough and had almost no online resources. But here we are. You start off, and eventually, as the development continues, there will be more structures unlocked. But right now, we have the vehicle assembly building, which you build rockets. You have the training center, which is for the tutorials. And I'll show some of the tutorials, but I'm not going to go through all of them. It takes a while, and a lot of them aren't that useful. We have a tracking station, which you can track the flights in progress and other things that you've deployed up into space. And then the launch pad. Actually, there's 4 launch pads, unlike the original, where there was 1 launch pad and 2 like runway strips. Because the intention is eventually to get multiplayer, so multiple launch pads will serve multiple players. I will do a few training center videos, but like I said, not all of them. So this is the training center, and the training center allows you to fly simulated missions. While you're in the training center and doing the tutorials, time does not progress, meaning that if you have missions that are in progress, they're paused in time. And let me pick some of them. So here's the very first one to give you an idea of what the tutorials are like.
Space is the place.
So some of the tutorials are cartoons like this, and others are more hands-on.
Have you tried rockets?
So this one is just going to explain how you can launch rockets. So this is the important parts. It's the concept of staging, really.
Thrust, which propels them forward. When a fuel tank is empty, it is dropped to stay as lightweight as possible, allowing the rocket to go even faster. These tanks, as well as other expendable parts of a rocket, are called stages. Different stages do different things. Often the first stage is very powerful, with just enough fuel to get the vehicle through the atmosphere. The second stage usually has a...
All right, so let me adjust the volume a little bit. But that was what a typical tutorial looks like. Some of them you actually do fly. What I will say about the tutorials, a little critique, is they're not super robust, so sometimes you will do something a little off script and the tutorial doesn't understand what you did and kind of blows up. So you do have to restart tutorials from time to time as a result of that. All right, let's try to fiddle with the volume a little bit. And I'm going to try to pick out a few interesting tutorials. But we have how do rockets work, how to launch a test rocket, simple construction, the VAB camera controls, which is important even for Kerbal Space Program veterans because the camera controls in the vehicle assembly building are a little bit different. How to stage rockets, the altimeter and time warp, and landing and recovery. Then missing the ground. So this one is probably a tutorial for people that don't understand orbital mechanics. So I will play through this one and hopefully I adjusted the volume correctly. So what's, I think, most confusing to players is that,
missing the ground. If you want to visit space for more than a couple of minutes, you'll need to get to orbit. An object is in orbit when it's moving sideways so quickly that even as gravity causes it to fall, it keeps missing the ground. As long as that object isn't slowed down by anything, it follows the same path every time it goes around the body it's orbiting. Forever. If that object is a Kerbal, it is recommended that they bring lots of snacks. So since your goal is to move horizontally at a high speed, why not launch sideways? On Kerbin, the atmosphere is like a thick soup. You waste a lot of fuel trying to fly through it horizontally. By launching vertically, you cut through the thickest part of the atmosphere as quick as possible. Most orbital rockets begin tilting toward the horizon soon after they leave the launch pad. This maneuver, called a gravity turn, uses the planet's gravity to turn the ship and reduces the amount of fuel needed to achieve a stable orbit. When launching near the equator, your gravity turns should point toward the east, since your vehicle gets a free boost from the planet's rotation. Thanks, planet! Once a vehicle is moving quickly enough that its arc will take it above the atmosphere, it shuts down its engines and coasts to space. Once it nears the top of that arc, the vehicle needs to fire its engines a second time to keep itself from falling back down to the planet. Doing this turns that arc into a nice big circle. Congratulations! You've missed the ground.
That's all the important parts of this. So what I was trying to say is, contrary to what you see in sci-fi, where like spaceships just go from point A to point B directly, which is totally not how space works and space travel works. They're all orbits. So if you want to move from one object to another, you orbit one object, you slingshot to the other object, and then you're captured by the sphere of influence of the second object. There's a few sci-fi that like do this correctly, but you know, if we're talking like Stargate or Star Trek or Star Wars, I mean, there's no concept of orbital mechanics whatsoever. You have to get into the nitty-gritty shows that go into detail, like The Expanse, that actually has a little bit of it that's not all like crazy and made up. But point A to point B is how photons travel, but anything with gravity doesn't work, or anything with mass rather doesn't work that way. So I'm going to show one more training video that I thought was particularly useful, which is how orbital transfers work, and I believe, or rather, planning a maneuver. And I believe this one's more hands-on rather than the others. And then we'll start our fledgling space program. I cannot wait. So these tutorials are very helpful for people that are completely new to Kerbal Space Program. Most of them aren't going to be eye-opening.
Our rocket is in orbit over Kerbin and ready to fly. The mission today is to, drumroll please, intercept and orbit the Mun. To be captured by the Mun's gravity, our vessel must cross into the Mun's sphere of influence, or SOI, the zone in which its gravity is stronger than any other celestial body around it. We're going to create a maneuver plan to figure out when and how long we need to fire our engines to intercept the Mun.
So in the simulation, you'll see that these rockets are have a little cyan outline, kind of like how I have a red outline now. And this is to designate that you're in a simulation and it's not actual spaceflight. So let's do this tutorial. And these are the sort of hands-on tutorials. So this is planning a maneuver.
Great.
I would say...
Now here's a new trick. We can select any object as a target in map view. Targeting gives us useful information and enables new tools. Once we've targeted a celestial body or other object in space, our maneuver will provide closest pass and plane angle information. This can be very helpful for meeting up with someone or something in space. Right now, our camera is following our vessel as it orbits Kerbin. Let's adjust our camera until we can see the Mun. Then, right-click to target it.
All right, so there's the Mun over there. Right-click to target it, and set as target.
We want to place this maneuver plan with two things in mind. First, the Mun is in motion. We can't aim our spacecraft where the Mun is right now. Instead, we have to aim where the Mun will be after our vehicle has coasted all the way from Kerbin.
I'll get into how to read the UI after these tutorials. I just wanted to show a few tutorials so that you know what kind of tutorials there will be. So if you're new to Kerbal Space Program and you're like, oh man, I can't understand orbital mechanics, there are tutorials in place that will break it down for you. Of course, they're voice acted with what it sounds like a teenage girl, but that aside, they're very actually useful for new players, I think. So this is how to do Hohmann transfers. Basically transferring from one sphere of influence to another. Again, like I said, you can't just fly straight there. That doesn't work in the real world. So we're going to execute a transfer maneuver here, which is, I would say, the two most important things to understand in Kerbal Space Program is how to launch to orbit, which requires staging and planning for delta V and thrust to weight ratios and all that stuff and stable rockets so you don't tip over and hit the ground. And then B, how to transfer. And if you understand how to launch to orbit and how to transfer, you can basically do everything in Kerbal Space Program for the most part. The other nuances would be docking and things like that, which are a little bit trickier. But yeah, let's do this transfer.
Second, remember how increasing velocity raises the opposite side of our orbit? Since we're placing this maneuver plan where we intend to start our burn, we should place it on the opposite side of Kerbin from where we intend to intercept the Mun.
So just me eyeballing this, I'm going to say the transfer is going to be about here as an experienced player, where we burn here, expand the apoapsis from where it is now over to where the sphere of influence of the Mun will be, because the Mun orbits counterclockwise. But let's see what the game says.
Placing a maneuver plan usually involves making a best guess,
Yep.
and then fiddling with the maneuver until you get an intercept. Fortunately, you've got a crack navigator with you today. By my calculations, we'll want to put our maneuver here.
Okay, so in order to make a maneuver, you just, this circle is the current path of the Mun Traveler, which is the rocket that we're controlling, this thing. And the light indicates the direction it's going, so it's heading this way, eastward, around the equator. And it's saying to put a maneuver here. And I'm going to create a maneuver plan.
Excellent. We've just created a maneuver plan. While we could find out if our departure timing is correct by just picking a direction and maxing the throttle, a maneuver plan tells us in advance how much delta V we'll need, how long we'll need to burn, and in what direction our vessel will need to point during the maneuver. Grab and pull the arrows to plan a burn along that direction. This maneuver is pretty simple. We want to burn prograde and expand our orbit.
Okay, so you click on the maneuver here, and there are the normal, anti-normal, radial in, radial out, prograde, and retrograde. Basically, prograde is forward, retrograde is backwards, and then the rest become relevant later on. But we drag this maneuver node, which is what our planned burn will be, and we're just dragging it out towards Mun. And there it is. We hit Mun.
That maneuver event towards the end of your trajectory is exactly what we're looking for. It tells that if we execute this plan, we'll intercept the Mun.
Okay. One thing I will say about the maneuver plans is having used them, they are less precise than the original Kerbal Space Program. I'm not sure why. Maybe I'm using them wrong. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's not the game. But that's one thing I have noticed, that if you do exactly what the burn timer says to do, you're often off course and requires small course adjustments. But we'll see how this one goes.
If a maneuver looks right, but we're not getting the intercept we expect, we can change the starting position of the maneuver by grabbing and dragging the middle of the maneuver plan along our orbit. It's very common to refine a maneuver plan by adjusting both the position of the maneuver and the direction of the planned burn.
So the way to read this is the weird orbs that you see around the Mun are where we enter and where we exit its sphere of influence. So, and then over here, this node here shows where we enter the sphere of influence and exit the sphere of influence. So we're not going to get captured by Mun's gravity. We will have to retrograde burn to slow down once we're there. But what this tutorial is saying is that you can refine when you do the burn to fine-tune it. And it's also possible to fine-tune it in a way that saves you fuel. So you set up what you think is a good burn, and then you drag it around to find the most ideal time to save you fuel. Because the limiting factor of this game is basically fuel. You can't get from point A to point B with limited fuel if you waste a whole lot of it.
If we don't want to maneuver at all, we can delete the plan, either by right-clicking the gizmo and selecting delete, or through the burn timer.
Okay.
Maneuvers are invaluable when leaving Kerbin. feel free to come back and practice anytime.
Okay, so this is how to do a maneuver, and we could execute it, but I'm going to end the tutorials and start. So generally speaking, in the career mode, you have initial contracts that just require you to like go up 1,000 feet into space, or 1,000 meters up into space, you know, those kind of contracts. But before we get into that, I will explain some of the additional stuff that tutorial didn't cover. So we right now are at Kerbal Space Center, and let's go to the vehicle assembly building. So this is where you're going to build your rockets. There are no, there's no like runway assembly building yet. So these are all the parts that currently exist. More will be added as development progresses. It also has some of them favorited, because these are the sort of basic parts that you want to build basic starter rockets out of. And then this is a little tutorial about how to do assembly, but I'll be explaining that, so I'm just going to get her to shut up. Stop it. All right. So most rockets either are manned or probes. Probes typically require satellite equipment so that someone at Kerbal Space Center can issue commands so that the probe moves, which requires a communications network, which we don't have built. So the first rocket we're going to build is going to be a little atmosphere skipper. It's not going to do very much. So we're going to use the MK1 tin can, which is a single seat command pod. It is just under a ton. It has pretty decent impact tolerance. It stores electrical charge, and it has 1 Kerbal. So this is what it looks like. As you can see, unlike the original, you can actually see into the vessel. So it's a little bit different. There's also like internal lights and things like that you could turn on. If we want the Kerbal to survive, we're probably going to want a parachute, right? For vessel recovery, because Kerbals don't survive infinitely, collision impacts and the like. But here are all the parts that currently exist. So you have command pods, you've got fuel tanks, you've got engines, you've got structures like trusses, and another control surface structures for mostly for like space centers and the like. You've got coupling so that you can set up staging, payloads, if you have satellites or rovers or the like. You've got control surfaces, nose cones, aerodynamics, stabilizers, wings, tail sections, etc. Gears if you're building rovers, and landing legs if you're building landers. Heat shields for re-entry. And then you've also got electrical storage, solar power panels, and generators, fuel cell generators, communication devices, and then parachutes and stabilizers, like gyroscopic reaction wheel stabilizers and lights and the like. This first craft is going to be intentionally very, very simple. So we're just going to use the tiny little parachute, and then I'm just going to stick a tiny little fuel tank on it because we're not going very far. And then let's do a swivel, a Terrier. One thing I haven't been able to figure out is where it shows me thrust to weight ratio. So maybe someone that already knows can point that out to me. But that's one thing that I have not found, which is very strange. But thrust to weight ratio is essentially, the engines that you slap on can only provide a certain finite amount of thrust, and if you make a craft far too heavy for the engines to be able to move it, you're just burning fuel into the ground. But yeah, so we'll test this little one out. So what to look at here is there is this new blueprinting mode. So here is the craft from the back, the craft from the top, the craft from the bottom, or right, and then bottom, which is a interesting new blueprint way. You could also middle mouse click to focus on a specific part. to center it, to rotate it, to zoom in. So if I wanted to zoom in on the engine, I could just middle mouse click, and then I can see the engine. It does make building finely tuned crafts a little bit easier than the original game, which is a little bit wonkier. What I will say is actually, I struggle with it, but I think that's due to a lack of experience. All right, so let's launch this thing. The other things to look at is, so you have all the parts list on the left. You can also just search like landing gear. So here's like things that involve landing. Then down here we have workspace orientation. If you want to build space planes rather than space rockets, this will show you the center of thrust, center of mass, and center of pressure. So the thrust is obviously at the bottom, the mass is kind of in the middle. And this is, what's really important, I would say, is that you calculate the center of mass and center of thrust, because you don't want a craft too heavy on one side or another, because then it will start listing and tilting and be very difficult to control. This is the symmetry mode, so if you wanted to attach things like radial decouplers to attach things on the side of the craft, you can change the symmetry from all the way from just 1 up to 8, which is really useful when you want, radial decoupling separators and things like that. Then, whether it snaps or not. And then these are the different tools that allow you to translate. So if I put a radial decoupler here and I was like, you know what? I want this to move down a little bit or up a little bit. You can move it in just one cardinal direction rather than the sort of dragging, which can be less precise. The assembly anchors. And then there is now a new color palette. So it allows you to paint things kind of however you want. So if we wanted a very bright, clownish rocket, no problem. We can do that. This first rocket, I'm not going to give it a name, because this is just sort of my own tutorial rocket. But let's restore agency colors. Let's get this launched. After... Oh, the color manager doesn't seem to want to go away. Okay, I'll just drag you out of the way. So down in the bottom right, it will show you the staging. So right now, it's just the staging is the engine and then the parachute. And then here, you also have the Delta V, which is how much sort of fuel that you have. Page is going up. So when I hit the go, we'll have a countdown, and we'll do a little launch with Bill Kerman. So in this HUD, you've got brakes. If you have rovers that would use brakes, you've got lights. So these lights are probably just crew cabin lights, because I haven't actually added any lights. So it's really hard to tell. You're in there, right? Oh, that's your helmet. Wrong window? Okay, whatever. And then you've got gears, solar, and whether or not you want to abort the mission. For the nav ball, the nav ball did get a little bit of reworking. So shift and left control is for thrust, which only works with liquid fuel, not solid boosters. Solid boosters are set at whatever you've set them at. It's usually 100, but you can set them lower if you want. Then you have your elevation, altimeter, your heading. This here is your vertical speed, meters per second. And then this is and I really like this feature. This is what phase of the atmosphere you're in. So it can show you sort of you're in thick atmosphere, medium, thin, space. This is for stability control. So I can point prograde, retrograde, normal, anti-normal, so on and so forth. There's also one for maneuvers if you set up a maneuver so that you can automatically point to your maneuvers. Here's all the info in sort of text form. Reaction control systems, which if we don't have any on the ship, but it would allow you to use monopropellant to adjust ships, which is really useful for docking and landing, particularly. You've got time warp in the middle down here. These are just camera modes. So you have your flight, your map, and your tracking center. And then over here, we've got showing the vehicle resources, showing all the parts that the vehicle has. The flight report of like what's been going on. And then, what is this one again? Oh, it's just a HUD for all of them. All right, so let's take first flight. We have a little countdown. We can skip it if we click the button again or hit space. It's a very underwhelming first flight. This is just a mechanical test, if you will. So in the bottom right, you can see how much fuel that I have. I can also throttle down so that I'm burning less. You can see our elevation here. And what I could try to do is just land this thing, provided I have enough fuel. Nope, I'm gonna crash. So here's an after action report, flight report of like vehicles destroyed. And because I'm on normal difficulty, you can revert to the assembly building, revert to launch, go to the tracking station, or just close. So if I wanted to revert to launch, I'll show you what like a typical starter mission would look like using the actual parachutes, which I wasn't doing. So let's get that relaunched just to show you. Also might want to adjust the graphics settings. Nope, never mind. So here's skipping the... Well, that was a mistake too, because I accidentally hit 2 phases at once. So as a result, what happened was that I hit the parachute initially. But there you go. Let's do that one more time. To show you what a proper launch will look like. So the next mission I'm going to undertake, or our first mission, our first real mission, is going to be a ballistic launch up to space. Basically, go to space, come back down, like a space tourism launch. And this little craft doesn't have enough fuel or thrust to make it to space on its own. It's too simple. Far too simple. So you can time accelerate under load when you're not drifting, when you're thrusting, but it's like a calculated time acceleration, so use it sparingly. There is a concept called the Kraken, which is when the physics engine kind of goes haywire and messes with you. So you can see our vertical speed over here. It's about 10 meters per second now. And once we start falling, I'll hit the parachutes. Because we're still slowly drifting up. So here, in this part of the atmosphere reader, we can see that we're in the upper section of the sort of the middle atmosphere. We're not quite in the thin atmosphere yet. But that was a good little first launch. You can see the curvature of Kerbal. Kerbin, rather. And, yep. Now we start falling back down. I'll hit that parachute and accelerate time, because it can take a while to descend. Even your parachutes can be finely tuned to be cut or change the deploy settings for what altitude or pressure to deploy at. So this parachute, for instance, will only deploy at about 1,000 by looking at it. And here is our altimeter. So you can see we're at 7,000, so it's not going to deploy until we hit about 1,000. And or it's not going to deploy at all because it's, you know, doing its thing. I think I might accidentally click cut. So let's go to the vehicle assembly building, and I'm going to update the priority here to build a first rocket. And I'm going to name these rockets after you guys. So here's also our first raffle. Raffle timer is here. So good luck, subscribers in the chat. And also, thank you for all the love on the activity feed. I appreciate it. So if we want to get to space, we already know that this doesn't have enough bang for the buck, right? Like, we launched this until it ran out of fuel, didn't make it. So instead, I'm going to add a little bit more fuel. And just adding more fuel without more thrust isn't really going to get us very far. This thing has more liquid fuel, but also a heavier engine, right? The heavier your crafts are, the harder it will be to break atmo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hook up 2 radial, or maybe 3 radial decouplers. And then 3 little solid boosters. So we can see what the staging might look like. And how to fix staging. So these solid boosters just burn until they're empty. They can't be adjusted post-launch. You can adjust their thrust ahead of time. Oh, no, maybe you can't. You used to be able to. A thrust limiter. But I guess you can't even thrust limit them anymore. Okay, good to know. Let's also add some aerodynamics to this thing. So, small little nose cones. And then add some stability. I don't think it will actually need it, but adding some stability so that it doesn't wobble. So what's going to happen here is on the right, we have the last stage, which is the parachute stage. We've got the swivel plus the solid boosters. And what I want to do is first adjust the solid boosters so that they're flush with the swivel for launch stability, because I'm not going to give this launch arms. And also the heat of the solid boosters won't cook the swivel or the fuel tank, because that's another thing to be concerned about. It looks like I lost my strut, so I'll add one more strut back in there. There we go. Then I want to adjust the staging here so that the swivel fires with the solid boosters, so it's all of them all at once. The vehicle name is in the top right. And what else do I want to add to this thing? I think I'm good. I think this is a very happy basic rocket. If we did want launch arms, it would be, I think, decouplers? I forget where they put them. Maybe in utility. Oh yeah, it'd be in utility, wouldn't it? No, I'm wrong about that too. Oh dang, where is it? I'll do a search. There we are. So this is a launch clamp, which would release it. We can use launch clamps for this. I don't think it's necessary given the stability of this rocket. But launch clamps are really useful for really large ships that are going to get damaged if they're just sitting on the launch pad. So in this case, what we want is the launch arms clamps to release at the same time that we fire up the rockets. So I put them all on the same stage. I'm going to do the raffle timer a little early because I don't think I need any more time to build this thing. So it is going to be named the Guero. Very basic name. Guero. Perfect. Save the Guero. And launch the Guero. The thrust weight is in the engineer's report in the app bar next to the launch button. Okay, cool. I'll take a look at that after I launch this thing. So, this is going to be a ballistic launch. I'm not going to try to orbit with this, but let's go. Well, that's underwhelming. Are you gonna... Oh, okay. Still wants me to launch. So down here, you can see that the solid fuel is going to run out far before our liquid fuel does. So that's when the next stage is going to hit. And that next stage is the releasing the solid boosters so that they don't weigh us down. Bye-bye solid boosters. Try not to hit the Kerbal Space Center because I'm going straight up. So, you know, that could be a problem. And what we're trying to do is our apoapsis, actually, let's cut the engines. Our apoapsis is already 200 kilometers, and to get into space, it's only 70 kilometers. So this mission is a success, and I'm actually going to point prograde so that we don't go way up into space. So if I hit M, you can see this is the arc of the flight, and I'm actually going to start firing downwards, as odd as that seems, because I don't want to spend a lot of time floating up into space forever. So this is a... oh, Paige, stop bothering me. This is a retrograde burn, just so that we're not floating into space forever. And down here, the apoapse is now 76K. 70K is space, so this mission is a success. We are in space officially now. So Bill Kerman can EVA. And he is now in space. I'm not going to let go, though. I'm too much of a coward. Maybe when we're actually in an orbiter. But this is an orbiter. It's a ballistic rocket. And now it's coming back down. The only problem that I have with this rocket, honestly, didn't design it a lot well, is that, A, it's in space, but it has no heat shield, and B, it has no decoupler to get rid of this, like, heavy fuel section, which is empty. So, if we were to refine this, if you're wondering, this is what, like, a new player's first launch might look like, but if you weren't in sandbox mode, this would be fatal. So, in order to iteratively improve this thing, because I'm only on normal difficulty, we can revert to the VAB, and I'll show you how to fix it. And if you're wondering if I'm intentionally making, like, newbie mistakes, yes, because you will make these mistakes. You will have unstable rockets that flip and cartwheel. You're going to have rockets that can't survive re-entry. So these are all things that you'll probably run into as a new player. And this is the solution. So we're going to take the Guerrero Mark 1 and make it a Guerrero Mark 2. So the way to fix this would be to pull this whole section off and then go to the thermals and stick a small heat shield on the bottom. And then below that heat shield, have a small stack decoupler. And the stack decoupler, if you see the arrows, this points downwards, which means this section pulls off like that. You can flip it like this, but then the stack decoupler stays on and it covers up the heat shield. So make sure to acknowledge the direction of the arrows there. And now this is far more survivable than the last craft, and it only really involved 2 tiny extra parts. So the engineer's report was where... Okay, there we are. You've got thrust weight ratio of 4.776. Perfect. The other thing that I will note is we had far too much fuel on this initial craft. So let me fix that too. So I'm going to pull off the boosters, pull off the swivel, remove the fuel tank, put in a smaller fuel tank because the larger fuel tank was unnecessary, and then stick this back on with a 3 symmetry. It's less important that these line up now because I have the launch arms. But let's go ahead and make it look nice anyway. There we go. Stick in one more strut. Correct the... No, the staging's already... The staging is not correct. So, the staging is not correct, and I'll show you how I know that. The decoupler is going to decouple immediately. So, basically, it would launch up all these rockets and then decouple the top. And it would, like, decapitate a rocket. So, let's add another stage in here. So that it's launch arms, the solid fuel boosters, the swivel, then get rid of all the solid boosters, and then decouple the top, and then the parachute. So this will be the Guerrero Mark II. And we'll launch this. Yeah, rule 1, check your staging, and rule 2, make sure that you can survive re-entry. Thank you for tuning in to Kerbal Space Program 2, which originally streamed live on Twitch, February 25th. If you have any feedback or questions for me, let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to catch a live stream of mine, Rhadamant.com has my stream schedule and countdown timers to upcoming streams. If you'd like to join my gaming community, Rhadamant.com also has a link to Discord, as does the description of this video. Thank you so very much for watching. A special thank you to my Patreon patrons, Twitch subscribers, and viewers like you that support the channel and made it all the way to the credits. Thank you so very much. I hope to catch you next episode or an upcoming stream of mine. Farewell, my fellow Kerbonauts.